So we know that the obesity epidemic is a huge issue, and we also know that there's a lot of recommendations for people to diet, eat less, exercise more, and we need to think about some of the challenges that people face when they are receiving that advice and what things we need to be mindful of when we're approaching dietary change. So let's start by getting the word diet clear in our heads. Now, we presumably have this fairly clear, we'd hope, as dietetic students and dietitians. But if you look at the dictionary and what people are thinking about with diet, a diet is the food and drink usually eaten and drunk by a person or a group. So we might look at a diet of people from, or a diet of people from America. What is the typical diet of a particular group of people? Or we look at it from the way that perhaps is a bit more in tune with what we're thinking of as dietitians. We're looking at an eating plan. When perhaps someone eats less or they have a particular type of food because they are following a medical diet, for example, like a gluten-free diet for celiac disease. Then you've got these terms like, well, we have a healthy diet, we need to eat a varied diet, we don't want an over-restrictive diet. So as dietitians, we are promoting some diets and not others. And that terminology of what we actually mean is really important. But because we are talking about obesity and weight management, we are, of course, talking about diets where we're looking potentially at people to be eating less. Is there a problem with that? And I think this is something that we need to get our heads around because for so long, the idea has been in when you eat less, you exercise more. Bingo, all sorted. But there are problems with people restricting their energy intake because of the way that our bodies work. So this paper is a review paper. It's quite an interesting read, quite easy to read. And what they're looking at is, what happens to your body when you are trying to lose weight. And this is, what's happening. And what they've found is that it's not just this whole idea of our bodies being programmed for famine through, ancient history and evolution. It's a little bit more than that. And it's all influenced by a range of things going on at a cellular level. So at the structure of our fat tissues, our adipose tissues, our hormone functions, how our energy is metabolized, our neurons and what's going on and how responsive our neurons are. And there's addiction-like mechanisms going on as well. But what happens is that actually these mechanisms start working before we even start to lose weight. So they've been called anti-starvation mechanisms. As soon as we reduce our energy intake, so before you've even lost weight, it's not because your energy stores have decreased, but even when you start decreasing your energy intake. So our bodies have a number of anti-weight loss mechanisms, which makes it extremely difficult for people, particularly if they are following weight reduction, energy reduction diets. And some of this is due to hormonal adaptation. And this is a really interesting paper, really interesting and highly cited. So what they basically had is 50 people living with overweight or obesity, but not diabetes. So they took that confounding factor out and they had them on a 10-week weight loss program on a very low energy diet. And they measured their hormone levels before they started the diet, at the end of that 10-week weight loss program, and a year after the end of that program, so at 62 weeks. And what they found is, after a year of people not being on that highly restrictive diet, the hormone changes were still there. So we've got these different hormones, peptide YY, cholecystokinin, insulin, leptin, all having lower levels. They found that ghrelin and pancreatic polypeptide were up, but also so was appetite. So by trying to lose weight, you can increase your appetite. So this is really difficult for people who are trying to eat less, and to maintain that, and partly explains why when people lose weight, they very often put it back on again. And for each individual, there's going to be slight differences in how all of this lot works and how it works together in combination. So what are the consequences of dieting then? So here's just some idea of some of the things that are going on when people are put themselves onto a diet. We get higher levels of adrenaline and cortisol, that's the stress hormone, increased anxiety, less sleep, low mood, people become irritable, intense, they may have difficulty making decisions, they may feel cold, particularly of hands and feet, and a little distracted. So often what you get is people becoming preoccupied with food. They're not just eating, they're reading about food, they're watching food things. They have to put more time and energy into thinking and planning about food. So you don't just go to the supermarket, you're thinking, right, okay, I'm going to follow this program, therefore I need to buy this, this, and this. So the whole process of thinking about what you're going to eat, planning eating becomes a much bigger thing. Sometimes that leads people to, rather than having standard meals that they're used to, having strange mixtures of things, just to perhaps make it more interesting, more seasoning. So people are trying to overcome the changes in what they were having, which was impacting on them and on how tasty they think something is. So they add more things to make it more tasty. So we've got this upregulation of hunger, and fat is stored more. So we can end up in this position of actually being worse off than we were when we started. And this kind of all leads to this whole cycle of overeating, which I'm sure you've heard of. You restrict your food intake, you think about food more, you crave food, you binge food, and that leads to overweight. And then you get restricted eating. And sometimes people just think, oh, forget it. I'm just not going to focus on restricting at all. So there's moves towards thinking, well, stop focusing on weight, because it clearly is a very unhealthy thing. So then you get all of the fad diets coming in and all the myths around diets. And this gives you some idea of what you need to look for. But most of the fad diets that come in seasons, come and go, they promise things that, within this amount of time frame, you can lose this. It suggests that you can control your body and you can control what it needs better than your body can. That completely goes against what all those studies about hormones and things suggests. They suggest it's easy, going to be able to sort this, it's easy, and this simple energy in, energy out. But it simply isn't that straightforward. So fad diets are promising things that we now know are not realistic or feasible. The other problem with a lot of fad diets is they're not particularly safe. And this is things that we need to look out for. And be mindful as new things come in, having a look at them and saying, well, actually, if somebody wants to follow this, is there any harm in that? So these are some of the things to look at. Miracle foods that burn fat. Grapefruits. That was one that's been around for a long, long time. And I certainly had a patient who was eating 2 grapefruit a day for years, assuming that was going to burn fat. Unfortunately, her BMI was still in the obese category because, surprisingly enough, that had not worked. Although it is a good food, it's not burning fat. Sometimes you get bizarre quantities, the brown rice diet or the applesauce diet, things where they're just one food that we don't normally eat in large quantities. Sometimes you get rigid menus. You're going to have this and you're going to have that, and at this time you can have this and that. And sometimes you get things that say, well, you can't eat carbohydrates and proteins together, but you can eat these things in combination. And the hay diet was one of those. Don't eat carbs on the same day as you eat protein. Rapid weight loss is never going to be the best option or safe. And certainly for some people with health problems, it can be quite dangerous. And if there is no warning to check things out with your GP, particularly for people with medical conditions, that's a concern. All responsible dietary advice is going to include, if it's feasible, an increase in physical activity. So if that's not mentioned, that's a concern as well. And of course, as always, we need to look back and see, well, what's the science say? If it's saying something that's contrary to what we know about is good evidence, then it's not appropriate. And if it's missing food groups completely, then that's not going to be a healthy option. Because even with fats, which people so often see as bad, we know, of course, we need fat-soluble vitamins, and polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats have health benefits. So if we're cutting all fats out, that's not going to be beneficial at all. And looking overall at nutritional adequacy, is it adequate? If it's not, then it's not a safe diet. We need to make sure that our weight loss information is not doing harm. And weight cycling is harmful, and we know that. So we perhaps may be looking at stabilization to stop people going around this up and down cycling type way of living. This sign guidance, unfortunately, they haven't updated this because it was a very widely used guidance, but it's not yet been updated. But just picking out some of the information, it's not available on the website now, but you can access this online, and I put it in the references. Weight cycling is common because very few people manage to lose weight and keep weight off. And those people who do that, who go on strict diets to lose weight quickly, frequently will put more weight on than those who've kept their weight stable or just made smaller changes. And it's risky. It's got health risks to have that kind of weight cycling. And one of the things that will impact that is the loss of lean body mass. If you diet very strictly, you're going to lose muscle as well as fat. And then, of course, that muscle, which is the tissue that is more energy using, is not there. So even if you eat the same, you will gain weight because you have less lean body mass. That's not the way we want to go forward. Health at every size. The idea that supporting healthy habits rather than focusing on weight. The whole idea of this organisation is to decrease weight stigma. And there's a huge evidence base of the harm of weight stigma. So do we want to just encourage healthier eating rather than the focus on the scales and the weight? And there's a very good discussion paper, again, highly cited, that you might want to have a look at to get you to think through the issues around this. But the idea is that it's a less harmful way of promoting a healthier lifestyle. And it suggests that weight itself isn't the problem. So what I want to leave you with is a question, and to think about the pros and cons of whether we consider obesity a disease or whether we see it as a lifestyle choice. And there are masses of things to think about, but I'd like you to spend a little bit of time thinking, is it a disease? If it is a disease, what are the implications of that? If it's not a disease, what are the implications of that? And we'll discuss this a bit in the session.